From ghoulies and ghosties.
And long-leggedy beasties.
And long-legged beasties.
And things that go bump in the night.
Good Lord! Deliver us.
Deliver us.
Hello there, spooks and spookettes. Count Drahoon here, and tonight I present to you my review of Lee Cronin's The Mummy. But before we dive into that, allow me to take care of the castle-keeping notes. If you are watching this video right now, as you are sitting, standing, or hanging upside down, thank you so much. If you can, please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Count Drahoon Presents. And if you want to take your support just a little further, might I invite you to become a patron through my newly relaunched Patreon page. For $1 a month, you will get an exclusive video made by me for you based off topics that you want me to talk about. Do you want to know why mummies don't fly cars or bikes or... Well, I think we probably ought to establish why mummies don't fly in the first place. You can ask that question of me. Just comment below on the videos that I already have posted to my Patreon page, and I will tackle your topic in the following video. For $5 a month, you get that, plus access to our private Discord server. We will also include your name at the end of each video as a credited producer for the show. And now that that's out of the way, let's get into the heart of the matter. And hopefully you won't feel the need to drive a stake through it. Lee Cronin's The Mummy follows the Cronin family, who several years ago were living in Egypt as the father, Charlie, was a news correspondent covering what was going on in the Middle East, particularly in Cairo. His wife is a nurse, and they had two small children, Sebastian and Katie. Katie was kidnapped by a mysterious magician woman. Charlie chased after her in the streets of Cairo, but was unable to due to a mysterious sandstorm that seemed to pop out of nowhere, which allowed them to make their escape. She was reported missing, and for 8 years, the case went cold. That is, of course, until a plane crashed somewhere in an oasis in Egypt, and in that plane they found a piece of cargo that was undisturbed by the wreckage of the crash. It was an ancient Egyptian sarcophagus in which contained Katie, somehow alive and mummified. This was, of course, 8 years after her disappearance, so the authorities are able to get in contact with the Cronin family to let them know that their little girl had been lost and found alive. Of course, they go back to Egypt to retrieve their daughter, but notice that, well, something's a little off with Katie. She just doesn't really look like a normal human being, to put it quite bluntly. Her skin seems to be decomposed, and they're not quite sure if she's just severely malnourished, if she was mistreated very badly. So they bring her back to the United States in their home in New Mexico, and that's when all the crazy, freaky stuff starts to happen. They soon realize that Katie is in fact embodying an ancient demon known as the Nesmerian, that can only be held at bay inside the body of a human host, and also mummified with bandages with the sacred ancient writings that sort of act as a binding spell to keep the creature at bay and basically locked up in a sarcophagus. They weren't supposed to find Katie. They were trying to transport Katie out of the Egyptian oasis, but of course, in traditional monster fashion, she was able to use her demonic powers to crash the plane and was subsequently found by some Egyptian archaeologists, as it were. So that's the basic plot of the movie without giving too much away. So here's the thing about the Mummy franchise as a whole, beginning in 1932 with Boris Karloff, leading us to where we are today with Lee Cronin's film. to me, it always seems like this is the one universal monster that has had the most trouble breaking out and truly being its own thing. Don't get me wrong, I love the 1932 version of The Mummy with Boris Karloff. Now, I have said in the past that it was my least favorite. And that's more or less still the case, but that doesn't mean that I don't enjoy the movie or think that it's good and it hasn't deserved the accolades and respect that it has garnered over the years. But what I will say about it is that if you strip down the Mummy's story as simply as you possibly can, you remove Boris Karloff as Imhotep in that film, and you even take away the location, ancient Egypt, modern Egypt, and then back and forth with ancient Egypt, it's more or less the story of Dracula, which came out the year before. And even some of the elements of Dracula are pretty apparent in this particular film version. I mean, aside from the romance angle, you even have actors David Manners and Edward Van Sloan, who are basically playing carbon copies of the kinds of characters that they played in Dracula in this particular movie. So it's a little distracting for me personally. Still a well-done film, and even the director of the movie, Karl Freund, he was the cinematographer for Dracula a year before. So, nevertheless, it's still a good movie, but it is sort of a recycled storyline, if you really think about it. And even going into the 1940s, which those particular Mummy films are the ones I prefer, with the storyline dealing with Chorus instead of Imhotep, which, let's be real here, Chorus and Imhotep are basically the same character. They just didn't want to call him Imhotep because Karloff was so synonymous with that role, and frankly, Karloff didn't want to come back and play the Mummy. So they changed the name of the character. It was played by several different actors over the course of the 1940s, but the Mummy in this particular iteration of the franchise was more or less like Frankenstein's monster. So even then, they're sort of borrowing different tropes from different monsters, and they more or less do this all the way through, well, there are not really any Mummy films made in the 1950s, unless, of course, you count Abbott and Costello Meet the Mummy. But even in the 1960s with the Hammer films, they sort of borrow a little bit from both. But I will say that with the Hammer movies, they borrow a little bit here from Dracula, a little bit here from Frankenstein, but they do it in such a way that it doesn't, it doesn't copy too much from either of those franchises, so they were sort of able to spin off and make their own thing. But I still think that it kind of struggles a little bit because you're not really doing anything different than you were back in the 30s and 40s. Now, of course, other Mummy movies have been made that aren't exactly part of the Universal franchise, and though I would agree that Mummy movies have their place and their own sort of niche carved out in the horror genre, I don't think that they have the sort of staying power that other kinds of monsters have had over the years, particularly when you're comparing it to Dracula, vampire movies, the Wolfman and werewolf movies, Frankenstein movies, so on and so on. I will say there are a couple of points of originality that are sort of scattered through the years. One I would point out, oddly enough, the Disney Halloween film Under Wraps, which has been a favorite of mine for a very, very long time. You do sort of have this Frankenstein-esque quality to the Mummy in this movie, but the Mummy is such a really a unique character compared to all the other Mummy monsters in the past, because there's so much pathos in this particular portrayal. The Mummy has a name, or at least the Mummy takes a name given to him by the children, and there's definitely a love and a camaraderie that he develops with the kids as they try to help him get back into his sarcophagus. And even though he can't speak, he does emote quite a bit. And he cannot physically speak because, obviously with the mummification ritual, you get your tongue cut out. I would actually argue that the Brendan Fraser mummy films, or the Stephen Sommers mummy films, are perhaps the best and most unique iteration of the Mummy franchise, if you're talking about the Universal Mummy franchise specifically. And the reason being is that you have, in some parts, an homage to the films that Karloff did and Lon Chaney did, and so on and so on through the 30s and 40s. But then you also have an homage to pulp films. Sommers was right to give this movie an action comedy edge. It added something to the franchise that I think was lacking in previous films, that really made this movie series unique and totally set apart, and just really gave it something a little bit more original that I just don't think that anybody else had really ever tried with the previous Mummy movies. It's like I said before, they either just tried to make a straight-up Dracula kind of movie, but with Egyptian themes with it, or they tried to make a Frankenstein movie. And with this one, it's like, yes, there's a little bit of that, but there are a lot of things that are played up a lot more, particularly what seems to be the all-powerfulness of Imhotep. That character in Stephen Sommers' vision, I think in some ways is a little bit more intimidating. Not so much in presence, because obviously Boris Karloff's Imhotep is a lot scarier looking than Arnold Vosloo. Arnold Vosloo has a lot more powers, and obviously some of that is just technological differences of the times. But Stephen Sommers was able to play around with that, and he was able to show a character that, could do a lot more with his abilities, or at least we were in a position to where we could see that. So, and I think Sommers did that masterfully. But then also, it's like he did a very good job of developing all the other characters around Imhotep. Obviously, the characters that were pursuing him, but then also the villains that were trying to help him conquer the world, so to speak. So those movies have definitely stood the test of time. They have a huge following. I would argue that those movies are actually just a little bit more popular and have a lot more staying power than some of the other Mummy movies in the past, because with this film series you actually have an attempt to try something different, whereas the previous Mummy movies, I just feel like just struggled to find something, and whatever that was, Stephen Sommers got it. Now we fast forward past Tom Cruise's Mummy movie, which I really don't feel like I need to say anything more about that particular film, because we just know it's awful. But with Lee Cronin's Mummy, I think it actually struggles with the same problem that almost every other Mummy movie has ever struggled with, and that is how do we differentiate ourselves? And really, Stephen Sommers was actually trying to differentiate himself from all those other movies. Now, obviously, no disrespect to the older Mummy movies. I think that they were trying to do something good, but they didn't really branch out and expand on anything to make the Mummy well-rounded. And I think with the Stephen Sommers movies, there was definitely a very successful attempt at that. So Lee Cronin, I feel like in a lot of ways, was struggling with that with this one. It's like, okay, well, how do I make my Mummy film different from the 30s and 40s mummies, which were pretty simplistic, not that that's a bad thing, and then also different from the Brendan Fraser films, because I'm sure that Lee Cronin saw the issues with the last Mummy movie with Tom Cruise, and he didn't want to repeat that. So what I will give Lee Cronin credit for is that, for one thing, he put his name on the film. Kudos to him for taking pride in his work, or at least that's what it seems to me that he was trying to do. But I have to question as to whether or not he tried hard enough to differentiate himself from the rest of the pack. In some ways, I think he did, but what he ended up doing in the process was essentially, he basically still fell into the trap. Instead of borrowing from Dracula and from Frankenstein, he borrowed from his previous work, which, in case you didn't already know, Lee Cronin was the writer-director behind Evil Dead Rises. So the movie that we got, in my opinion, really wasn't a mummy film. This was really more... I mean, it was kind of an Evil Dead movie, but with bandages. I mean, the main monster wasn't a pure mummy. It was a demon that had to be bound through mummification, and that's a completely different thing. And that's a reason why I don't like the movie. Like, for one thing, that's false advertisement. To me, that smacks of Matthew Broderick's Godzilla movie, where you have a movie it's a giant monster, kind of sounds like Godzilla, but doesn't look anything like Godzilla, doesn't resemble any of the source material of any of the Toho movies, even though they had the rights from Toho to make this movie, to use Godzilla's name. It's kind of the same thing with this. It's like they use the mummy name, but there's really no mummy in this, if you really think about it. Which, you know, that's not really what makes this a bad movie, in my opinion. What I dislike the most about this film is that this is a movie that had a lot of things going for it. A little bit similarly to my review with Luc Besson's Dracula, although I will say that this is a much better movie than Luc Besson's Dracula. But the thing is, this film had pretty decent character development. I really liked the dynamic of the siblings. Not Katie, but the younger daughter, Maud, and Sebastian, of course, is an older young man once they find Katie. The family dynamic, even with the grandmother, seemed to be, you know, it seemed to be a nice dynamic. They seemed to get along, but then you had these scenes where it's like everybody was fine, but then when Katie gets back into the picture, all of a sudden, the husband and wife, they reveal that they resent each other because of what happened 8 years before. And that didn't seem apparent to me, you know, in the lead up to finding Katie. So, basically what all this comes down to, the acting was good. The chemistry between the actors I thought was fine. The film was shot well. The horror elements of this movie were fantastic. There's some really good body horror that really sticks with you, that disturbs you. And of course, if you've seen any of the social media posts, particularly from my good friend Addie Hudson, aka She's Spooky or Addie Haunts, you know, you after watching that movie, you don't want to clip your toenails anytime soon. I'll just leave it at that. You know, all of those things worked really well, and they were definitely the best parts of the movie. But again, it falls apart with the writing. The writing of this movie is lackluster at best. It's not well written at all. There are a lot of loose ends in this movie. You know, you notice that throughout the duration of the movie, you know, Katie is catatonic half of the time. And then the other half, it's like, you know, she attacks the grandmother quite a bit. She attacks a priest later on in the movie. And and there was something that was missed there. It's like, I would have loved for them to explore as to why why she was so harsh towards the grandmother, why she was so harsh to the Catholic priest. Because it seemed to me, it's like, that implied that, you know, obviously this was a demon, but like that demon felt like that they had to attack what was good. And in particularly, you know, you had two people that were essentially representing Christianity. So, you know, she just dove right in and, you know, was particularly gruesome towards the grandmother for praying for her. And it's just like, you know, I wanted to see more of that kind of stuff. You got characters that are sort of jumping around, like literally from continent to continent in what seems to be a short amount of time. That one didn't bother me quite as much, because you can sort of suspend your disbelief a little bit with, you know, just a movie told in sequence. It's been done before. But, you know, the reviewer that I mentioned earlier sort of mentioned that, like, it almost seemed to imply that this movie was so bad that it was good because it was just off the wall and zany because of the violence. And the thing is, I take serious issue with that. It seems to be a catch-all, you know, or they're trying to make an excuse for lazy writing. And, you know, I feel like the so bad it's good label only works when you have a movie that's made by filmmakers that are really trying and giving it a serious shot, but there's so many things that are working against them, whether that's the quality of the talent, the lack of experience, the technical limitations, the budgetary limitations. You know, you take a movie like Manos: The Hands of Fate. While, yes, it's not necessarily a good movie because of a whole list of other things, but people love that movie because there is so much heart to it, because you know the backstory that this was made by a guy that loved movies, that wanted to make movies, but had no idea how to make a movie. And of course, you know, you get that movie put on Mystery Science Theater 3000, and, you know, the jokes sort of write themselves, and people just grow to love that movie, and it develops a following, and, you know, people start to enjoy that movie unironically, and ironically, if you want to. With Lee Cronin's The Mummy, I can't ascribe that label to it, because clearly Lee Cronin knows how to make a movie. He's made a movie in the past, and I feel like Lee had a lot of resources to make the kinds of movies that he wanted, but I don't know what it was. It's like, I don't know if he was just in a comfort zone, or he just kind of ran out of ideas, or maybe he just wasn't thinking about it. But, you know, he just stuck to what he knew, which I get. As a writer, you write what you know, but from what I understand from other people, like, he's literally copying a lot from Evil Dead Rises. And that's not a stylistic thing here. There's a difference between him using the same style and just using the same plot points. So, yeah, that's the big reason why I could not recommend Lee Cronin's The Mummy, because Lee Cronin could have made a very good film, but he did not. He fell into the same trap that previous writers or directors have fallen into with previous iterations of The Mummy. And like I said, like, there are things about this movie that are really good. And I will say that I was engaged enough to stick with it, because I was hoping that at some point, you know, something, I don't know, like something was going to pick up, and, you know, there were going to be things that were going to sort of connect things together, but there was just too many loose ends. Not just with the Christian thing, but also just the fact that the rules of the possession and how the creature, the monster, goes about and does his bidding, they're not very well explained. I mean, yes, you have the sort of bondage thing with the bandages that sort of holds it at bay, but what's the Nazmarian's purpose? Like, why does this demon do the things that it does? Is it an agent of Lucifer? Is it an agent of chaos? Is it trying to conquer the world? Is it, you know, what's the deal? And that's never really explained. It's just a demon, and it just does bad things, which, I mean, sure, I could get behind that, but again, it's like, you sold yourself as a mummy movie. You know, maybe I could kind of see this whole thing where, you know, it's a corrupter of innocence, so it's like one by one, it, like, kills off the family or makes the family into demons. Like, but again, it's not explained well. So I just feel like it's fast and loose with the rules, especially the ending of the movie is just, it just kind of takes it into a weird, cheesy direction that I didn't see coming and I didn't want. That's my 2 cents on Lee Cronin's The Mummy. Of course, the floor is yours. I'd love to hear your comments below on whether or not you agree with me, especially if you like the movie. I'd love to hear from you. What made the movie click for you? And I don't know, what are my blind spots, if any? Be sure to like this video, subscribe to Drahoon Presents, so that you can get notifications on my next video. And until then, Spooks and Spookettes, always remember that as far as things go when things go bump in the night, There are such things.
From ghoulies and ghosties.
From ghoulies and ghosties.
And long-leggedy beasties.
And long-legged beasties.
And things that go bump in the night.
Good Lord!